This is the Bailed Out Podcast,
You have rights. Nobody knows how to deal with the bureaucracy.
where we talk bail to keep you out of jail.
The only thing that saved me each time is I wasn't drunk.
Does that mean you're a really bad driver then?
Hosted by Sean Plotkin, a multi-generational bail agent and 5-star author. And John Roraba, a non-profit founder and attorney who has helped over 20,000 families.
We're not far right, we're not far left, we're very neutral, I hope.
Bail is the balance.
John, what is justice?
That is what the court system is there to establish.
Bailed Out is brought to you in part by searchandmate.com, Turning Leaf, and Angels Bail Bonds. Now, please welcome your hosts, Sean and John.
Wow, we really need to work on making that a smaller intro. But makes it sound amazing though, huh?
I liked it. You know,
Yeah.
it's nice. It's nice to hear yourself with musical accompaniment.
Of course.
Welcome to the Bailed Out Podcast. We have a really good episode for you now. Really important piece of news that has come out, and then we're going to go step by step on the most common bail scenario you might find yourself in with a DUI.
Or maybe vice versa. We flip it and we'll talk about the DUI first. Or actually, no, you're right. I'll defer to you on that. Yeah.
Just reading the schedule.
Yeah.
No, it's
I don't read well, so it's good that you're reading for me. You got the legal background.
Well, what I'm most excited about in the news this week is really a pretty small decision in its scope, but from the Supreme Court of the United States, but with a concurrence by Justice Gorsuch that really calls out the American colonial policies that we started under Teddy Roosevelt and the consequences of keeping those in our current law. And it's very rare for a Supreme Court justice to do this.
Well, let's pause for a second.
Yeah.
And let me hit one of these.
Sure.
All right, John. That's great. That's great. This is not small. This is a huge deal. But how does it relate to bail? We're a bail podcast,
Absolutely.
and our civil liberties and the bigger picture of where our world's going today and tomorrow and in the future. So
Absolutely. So one of the real important things with the criminal justice system is just how it's actually processed, and a lot of the criticism we talked about on the last episode from some of the racial policies that have been infused into the criminal justice system, they actually come out of the colonial era, and this time when.
And what era is the colonial era?
Well, yeah, we're still maybe in the colonial era. Exactly. So,
but realistically, for people, what is the colonial era?
Yeah.
Is that like 17th century, 18th century, 19th century? Is it just after the gold rush?
It starts with the Portuguese,
Okay.
really, but in North America, really, it starts with Pocahontas and tobacco and Jamestown. That was they finally found something that they could make money in by growing and
so more the 15th, 16th, before the founding fathers came and started the United States. So you're saying even before that?
Well, it's the whole thing, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the history of America, the revolution was really more about being the intolerable acts of the East India Company that was trying to manage us. That's what the Boston Tea Party was about, right? So we really rebelled against the globalists at that point, the colonialists. But in a sense, we decided we'd rather be the colonizers than the colonized.
Yeah.
And Manifest Destiny, the settlements of California, all of that, became colonial. But here, what they're talking about is where we had to make a real decision is when the Spanish Empire, the islands where we got Cuba and the Philippines and Puerto Rico and Guam and what Gorsuch is pointing out is that we made a choice at that time to treat those that we took over in these Spanish islands differently. Even though we've given citizenship now to Puerto Rico,
Yep.
It's limited citizenship because we didn't apply the Constitution in those areas.
So kind of where I'm thinking that you're saying, and I apologize for having to try and digest it, but some of what Gorsuch believes that Puerto Rico is facing is similar vein with our criminal justice system,
Yes.
and many of our civil liberties being encroached upon, taken away. But we thought we had them, and perhaps they're less there. Whereas Puerto Rico, perhaps, did they ever think they had them?
Well, I mean, that's essentially
Yeah.
the interesting history here is, how do we balance that, the rights of citizenship versus the rights of being a human being?
Yeah.
What rights do you have as a citizen? What rights do you have as a human being? And there's just that, that colonial mindset is based upon the English and the Anglo-Saxon being a superior civilizational race that can't integrate with the savages. And a lot of those attitudes have just carried over for a long time. And I see that in the criminal justice system,
Mhm.
and I see that in a lot of the ways that bail is actually implemented. So that whole dynamic between the global scale and the community scale is has been played out throughout American history. We're still playing it out. A lot of the things we're dealing with Russia
Yeah, no,
is
and
colonialism.
it's kind of ironic that that they don't allow bail in Puerto Rico, which
Yeah.
goes back to some of the civil liberties which we have here, very much so in California. It seems that California has been leading the way, not in just the bail, but as you and I discussed earlier, with the three different growth phases that you had mentioned.
Yeah.
You want to get into that a little bit to say, well, how do we help Puerto Rico get there? Like California got there, and yeah,
Well,
but
that's the question. We're at a point in the world where, are we finally going to resolve colonialism? Are we finally going to deal with that and the issues that that has, and have a more comprehensive humanistic approach? Because a lot of the reasons for colonialism no longer exist. You had to have resources in the smaller countries, and you had to control those smaller countries to get the resources. We have so much automation, and we can do so much more now. The needs for colonialism are gone.
well, I mean, you tell that to Russia with Ukraine. That's
Yeah.
in their form of colonialism. So
It is. It
uh,
is. Certainly the needs are less, so the this is a real opportunity now to renegotiate the terms in not only in the rest of the world, but also with a lot of our essentially colonialized populations, the Native American tribes, the First Nations still within our borders. The UN treats colonials over the sea differently than the ones that are internalized into the countries, but really the cultural unification of that. It's something that you and I have actually lived through, trying to get
hmm,
to live with our. I have a wife that was born in El Salvador,
yeah,
and you've had your
mine's born in
Brazil,
Mexico.
and I know
Yeah,
you spent a lot of time in
yeah,
Brazil
10 years in
and
Brazil.
Portugal, right? So
Então
there,
falo português.
yes, as in the
So let's get back to why this is important
for sure.
who helped to decide it and why that's important and pivot it back to some of the bail.
Well, it's interesting. So just taking some of the quotes that I've highlighted from Gorsuch's opinion, it's shocking how well, I'll just read some.
Well, first of all, who's Gorsuch? I think everybody should know that Gorsuch was or fairly recently named a Supreme Court justice.
Yes,
That was brought in under the previous administration,
yes.
and his ruling is more for civil rights violations, which I would say some people would think that a person that's put in by a right-leaning administration would have more of a civil rights-leaning decision.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's interesting for me. Gorsuch
Yeah.
is an originalist, and that's his attack on colonialism, is that these racist policies are not in the Constitution. And, so he is asking for attorneys to be able to bring him cases to overturn a lot of this colonial era policies that he specifically calls as shameful.
Mhm.
Is very direct language here. Now, I am an attorney in the Supreme Court bar. I am an attorney that if I write a writ of certiorari, which is what they decide whether or not they'll take cases, they have to read it. They don't have to grant it, but they have to read it. So, to me, hearing Gorsuch make such a call on such a fundamental area, and to have that call from the right and from the originalists, civil rights has an originalist point of view, and that just harmonizes with me, and that harmonizes with bail.
Yeah, no, that's great. So let's get the wheels to the road on this one. This is lovely. I think it's a big deal. I think that It's surprising that he took such a strong stance.
He did. I got to read just a couple of quotes just so you can get an idea. You know, the decision is United States versus Valero Madero, you know, if you want to look it up. But it's in the New York Times today. It's being well covered.
We have maybe another. I know I don't want to do this.
It's not going to be long.
Okay.
I'm going to read some of the things from
Cool.
the decision.
All right, cool. Yeah.
It's, you know, for instance, the Bill of Rights was so peculiarly English that an immediate and compulsory application of those rights to ancient and thickly settled Spanish colonies would furnish proof of our unfitness to govern dependencies or deal with alien races. This is the mindset that was brought into these policies, and that was adopted at the time. You know, such rules, the English rules, are inapplicable except amongst people whose social and political evolution has been consonant with our own. You know, they're trying to make everybody, you know, consistent and the same in those colonial policies, because that's how they can be exploited easier. So, you know, he at one point, you know, islands inhabited by alien races differing from us in religion, customs, laws, methods of taxation, modes of thought, the administration of government and justice according to Anglo-Saxon principles may be for a time impossible. Well, instead of looking at it that way, why is it that we're imposing such Anglo-Saxon principles on places that have such deep history?
Do you think rum comes from Puerto Rico? Is it Puerto Rican rum?
I
Or is that
don't know.
Cuban
It comes
rum?
from sugar. Puerto Rico
Sugarcane,
certainly
right?
has rum. It's certainly
I think
sugarcane, yeah.
Bacardi's from there.
Yeah, I think Bacardi is in Puerto Rico.
So
yeah.
if it's a national product and they're exploited for the resources, do they get drunk? Do they have DUIs there?
Do they have DUIs there?
Or are they just drinking the rum?
You know, look, and until relatively recently in our history, we did not have coffee breaks. We had whiskey breaks.
Well, we're talking about Puerto Rico, and we're going to loop over in a little bit to DUIs. Do you have any last moments you want to talk about? I mean, we could expound on this, the whole thing.
I could, but I do want to say that if you look up Rorabaugh on the internet, there's one Rorabaugh who just passed away, more famous than I, and his most famous book was on the drinking habits of the colonial era, which were remarkable. They drank constantly.
Oh, well.
So
probably had a higher quality of life, but
and apple cider mostly. You know, that was their big drink before Prohibition.
Wow. Huh.
But yeah, you know, I really think that's an interesting point into the criminal justice system and bail is the DUI. That's one of those modern crimes that really, you know, we've expanded, you know, over the last few decades, and bail has been a key part of that.
I know a lot of people have gotten DUIs, but probably 10 times more have gotten pulled over for a DUI. I know I have so many times where I have to walk the line and touch my fingers to my nose.
yes,
hold my foot up, and I'll be damned if I didn't fail every single practical DUI test. And then when they gave me the field sobriety, more times than not, I didn't have as much alcohol to take me in. But I mean, it is what it is. Have you ever been pulled over for a DUI test?
I've been pulled over half a dozen times for a DUI test, and the only thing that saved me each time is I wasn't drunk.
Does that mean you're a really bad driver then?
It may be. I drove a lot. You know, I was covering this whole state for a long time, you know, driving 20 hours a week as fast as I can to get from place to place. So yeah, sometimes falling asleep. But but when you do get pulled over, I mean, that's just a transformative experience.
Yeah, it's definitely eye-awakening. So I've heard a number of friends say, "Oh, well, don't roll down the window, don't cooperate." And then I was like, "Well, no, driving's a privilege, not a right. Right. You can revoke your license, so you should adhere to what you agreed to when you got your driver license." Yeah. And then I hear friends that are saying, "Well, don't submit to the breathalyzer, do the blood alcohol so you have more time." Or don't say you've only had 2 beers, because that's what everybody says.
That's what everybody says. Exactly. So.
What are some experiences that you've had? I'll regale some of the experiences I've had from clients that
Yeah, the one time I got closest to a DUI, I had 2 drinks and I told him, and he made me blow, and it was a .06, and
yeah.
that was they can start messing with you on those. But you had the DUI check stop coming, and so I ducked out ahead
Yeah.
of time, and they were waiting right there.
Yeah, I recently got pulled over and did the field sobriety. I failed, and I'm like, I'm gonna blow a .05. I had 2 beers. I'm like, oh, and so they did it, and then they had me blow. I blew a .05, and they're like, They really got pissed. They dropped the little plastic thing for it, and they didn't even say goodbye. They drove off. I'm like, they thought I was messing with them, but I guess I need to work on becoming more flexible. So we've had clients that not only are getting pulled over for DUI, but then they end up getting arrested, and then when they're in jail their loved ones are like, okay, well, he's only has a DUI, and then warrants have popped up,
Yeah.
and then one time, as crazy as this is, there's a $30,000 warrant on a $10,000 DUI bond, and the guy didn't know who it was or what it was, and didn't,
Wow.
and we're like, well, okay, well, this probably is the court system didn't get it wrong. And we bailed the guy out. He didn't agree to the warrant, and he didn't want to pay the bail amount. And now this guy's out, and he says it wasn't him. Ultimately, we had to give him a huge discount on the warrant, and we found out that it actually wasn't him.
Ah.
How is it that that the criminal justice system and the FBI, what is it, the CSIS, the
Yeah.
internet database that's used to be determining warrants?
Right.
How is it that they can make a mistake?
Yeah. Well, it's there's a lot of identity theft that goes out there,
Uh-huh.
and so I run into those wrong ID cases every once in a while, and they come in a lot of different flavors. I call it's a Baskin Robbins issue. Because but generally that happens just because someone's stolen the mail and they've got a conviction or they've got a warrant and they went in under the arrest with your name, and straightening that out can be very difficult.
So with the mail, then there's a lot of chance for fraud with mail, huh?
That's that. I remember trying to detangle 2 guys that were stealing mail and using each other's identity, and so mixing it up and just taking months to figure it out. Now, the current ID systems are pretty good. The ones that they have when you go to jail and they book you with the live ID, that's much better than it was. But, not everybody in the world is there. You have a lot of immigrants that come in. This might be a person's first interaction with the criminal justice system, or more likely, they've come in with no tags to our criminal justice system, and they're using your identity or somebody else's or a cousin's identity, or someone where they just they so they don't have anybody to match it to.
That's an interesting question. So if there's a lot of fraud in mail, and we have ballots that are mailed, does Puerto Rico, are they allowed to vote?
They do vote.
Okay.
They do vote. Yeah, in federal elections. Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
they don't have statehood. It's similar to Washington, D.C., or Guam, or, it's in the territories. But these cases made a difference between territories like Oklahoma, where there was an intent to future be a state. These cases are saying, we're never going to make Puerto Rico a state because they're too different. We're just going to control them like the English did their colonies.
So Guam and the Philippines were a U.S. territory that became
Yeah.
a state?
No, the Philippines didn't become a state. Both the Philippines and Cuba.
Or I mean, became their own separate countries, but they were
they did.
initially a territory.
They were a
So how
territory,
did they end
yeah.
up becoming their own country, and Puerto Rico's not able to be, or is it its own country and a
No,
territory?
it's just a territory. Yeah, they're just territories of the U.S., like Washington, D.C. It's they're not covered by the statehood, so they're, or like an Indian reservation. They're controlled by the federal government and their own sort of rules, but they have they don't have the rights of states, and they don't have the full panoply of constitutional rights. They don't get jury trials, for example.
I find it amazing that for businesses, I can go to Puerto Rico, start a business, and get huge tax write-offs,
Right.
but the citizens of Puerto Rico can't have many of the same civil liberties as a typical U.S. citizen besides voting. What other rights are they given that?
Well, so that's what Gorsuch is complaining about is the Supreme Court has made a whole body of law that says, this is fundamental and so it'll go to Puerto Rico, and this is not fundamental and so it won't, and trying to make those distinctions that don't exist anywhere in the Constitution. And so that's why he said we just got to throw this whole thing out, and the only reason I'm not is because no one asked me to. So
All right.
they became U.S. citizens. U.S. citizenship at a minimum should have the same privileges and immunities. If you want to get into real legal geek stuff, read Thomas's concurring opinion. Thomas's concurring opinion is a whole different lesson that I won't get into, but he thinks the privileges and immunities clause should be given more life rather than substantive due process, so that we can all have the same rights and privileges as citizens.
Okay, great. So now that we've talked about not getting upped for a DUI and getting underneath it, what would you say? I mean, of course, you get arrested, you're brought into jail, you're booked in, you have a warrant check to make sure, you're probably shipped to county. Now it's like, okay, well, I could get bailed out, I could not. But why don't you talk about some of the court aspects of a DUI, and then maybe I'll go back to bail.
Yeah. Well, the first thing with bail and the DUIs is they want to hold you because you're drunk.
Yeah.
Right. Is there a point that you can be released? And sometimes there are safety issues there, and then they will hold you just to dry you out. Even Andy Griffith did that as a sheriff.
Also, be careful if you have mouthwash. First of all, mouthwash will ruin your mouth bacteria and affect your nitric oxide production, which cause you to gain weight. But also, if you have mouthwash, it does have alcohol in it, and a cop could give you a hard time if you have mouthwash in your car. So be careful. Mouthwash is not good for you.
So DUIs, when you go to court, there are defenses, and sometimes the police don't do everything right, and you can get through with them, but most of them are pretty formulistic. You're gonna pay money, and you're gonna take classes, and most people just end up pleading it out, and every time it happens, it gets worse. The punishments get worse, and they escalate really fast.
And how long is it that if you're found guilty that you should not have another conviction of the same charge? Is it 5 years or 7 years, and then you can get that redacted from your records?
Yeah, a lot of times, you can do something called an expungement, which you can say that you were never convicted, except if you're trying to get a state license. If you do something where you're protecting the public, they can still use that against you. But for getting a regular job or not you don't have to say it. So expungements are important, and that is something that you can do. California's done a good job of trying to give people the opportunities for treatment rather than punishment. And there's a lot of that for the DUI cases, because if you're driving while you're drunk, you're putting other people at risk,
Of course.
for your lack of own self-control. Right. So it really is in our today's society a societal responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. And how are you going to, I had an uncle that was coming home from a bar, and he had been drinking a little bit, and there was an old woman that hit him in an intersection. She was speeding. She died.
Oh my.
He went to a 1 to 10 year prison sentence, because of that. And so if you have any alcohol in your system, even under the DUI levels, if you have any alcohol in your system and an accident happens, they're blaming you.
Yeah.
They're blaming you. I had a friend who in Fresno, there's a bad place under the bridge, and it was raining, and he hydroplaned and got a DUI because he had an accident and a lower than 0.08. So you can still get popped for that. And then tragically, my friend, who was an attorney, when it was raining a few months later, went out to see it. Another car hydroplaned and killed him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's just very dangerous with cars. I think we underestimate how much power there is, moving multi-tons, 80 miles an hour every day. When it stops in an accident, it's over.
Do you think self-driving cars are the way?
So, no, I think self-driving air vehicles are the way. Flying is safer, cheaper, and you can go farther. There's about 3 dozen companies in California right now that are getting the electronic
Yeah.
vehicles that are in production. I think within the next 5 years, because the auto flying works really well because you can control in the air. The auto driving is never going to be able to deal with the rain and the signs and just all the stuff we got going on in the ground. But they've now got a sky motorcycle that will be able to have 1,000-mile range with its wings. So we're going to be good.
Sky motorcycle.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So what happens as far as after you get a DUI, you're found guilty? What is it, 90 days or 6 months that you're gonna have to
Boy,
end
it
up going through
escalates.
classes and
Yeah. Each one you get, you have substantially more to do, and a lot of times, if you've got a drinking problem and a driving problem, you've got a responsibility problem,
yeah.
and it takes 3 or 4 of these times before it gets people's attention, and then you're in a hole that you got to walk out of. You got to walk a tightrope, where you could fall on either side, and that makes it really hard.
So are you thinking Turning Leaf is gonna partner with like Al-Anon or
Sure. Yeah.
or what is the other one? Alcoholics Anonymous and
Sure.
um,
All of those work well.
well, what kind of fabric do you think that Turning Leaf, which is his nonprofit to help those that have been incarcerated to be able to get a better step forward, or you said a hand up?
Yeah, hand
Yeah.
up. Yeah,
A hand up?
a hand up, not a kick down.
Not
Yeah.
a kick down. What were some of the other ones that you said? Pack up, lawyer
Yeah,
up.
yeah. So I've got my pack of cards here. If you wonder what that is, this has the secret of society in here. This is a social crystal. You will if you don't know who your 49 other people are you're important in your life, you don't have that tracked out, then you're not playing with a full deck.
Well, I mean, you also got to think of the 2 jokers, so you might have 51 others that you
That's
don't
true.
even realize are out there. But
No, that's true. But the jokers are the international entities that the full pack can negotiate with. But individuals have a hard time dealing with global entities. You need that intermediary scale. So
Yeah.
So it was and when you're in a full pack, then you have a zone of privacy. And you can have a whole bunch of experts doing things, and you can have one attorney. So my dream is I want to form packs of people that then retain me as their attorney, and I will defend them against fictional entities. Yeah, my slogan is pack up, lawyer up, be happy.
So how do we use that with? And that's a good slogan. I like that. How do we use that with Puerto Rico? Who's helping them to pack up and lawyer up and be happy to fight for?
But that's the scale. It's all about the scale.
Yeah.
The globalist scale is what the globalists are defending. The small scale, heart-based, connected scale is what whether it's the native tribes or those who are living in Puerto Rico or even the Jeffersonian populists, or the populists are all about the small scale self-sufficiency. And with today's technology, as opposed to 1900s technology, it actually works better to have the older system. We no longer need to have those sacrifices we had for factories. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense anymore. The factories are obsolete. Why would we make these social changes for obsolete technology?
Do you think that's part of the reason that Elon Musk with Twitter is trying to
Yes.
get more of that band to a greater hug and love and outreach and
fun.
fun? Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the groups that you have fun with. I do. I really think Twitter has become the core of the political dialogue, and getting that into someone's hands like Musk that really encourages dialogue and free expression is important.
Who's a big speaker for Puerto Rico right now? Is there anybody that's that's a big-
Sotomayor. That's the
yeah.
other, that there's a dissenting opinion in this. Sotomayor, the Supreme Court Justice, did her dissertation on our relationship with Puerto Rico. She understands it. Her dissent in this decision is actually really interesting as well.
So she's against what Gorsuch is saying.
No. So the actual decision of this is that a guy who was owed $26,000 in Social Security, they made a claim to take it back because he was in Puerto Rico when he was getting that. So Sotomayor is the only one who disagreed with that result. Gorsuch said it's not a fundamental constitutional right. The whole thing is wrong, and I'd overturn the whole part. but in this
Got it.
specific case, I'm concurring. So that's what's so extraordinary about
Yeah.
it. Normally, when they concur in the result, they say nothing. To have written such an aggressive calling out concurrence, and to have that come from Trump's first Supreme Court justice, I think really brings the civil rights back to the left and the right. Because politics works a lot like America was developed. We didn't develop from east to west.
Right.
We developed in a donut. We got the both extremes, right? And then we developed in the middle, and politics does that as well.
Which is kind of with Solomon. So what is it? Ik ben een Berliner. He wanted, Kennedy said he wanted to be a Berliner, but he said I'm a donut. So
Maybe he just said
he said it wrong, but in German, everybody applauded and laughed and was totally for him. And it's crazy to think how, like you look at George W. Bush, he's got, what, two DUI convictions, and he went on to be president of the United States. So I think that that DUIs are all encompassing, and alcohol is a bigger deal, and it's bigger with COVID and with the stress and then the families and a lot of the constraints on our civil liberties.
Well, but more fundamentally, we've organized our whole society, and especially in Southern California, around cars. We have suburbs, we have workplaces, we have commutes. So when you get a DUI, that really is like kicking you down into a whole nother economic strata, because if you can't drive in Southern California, how do you live?
Yeah, you're at least $10,000 or $20,000.
But that's part of colonialism, right? The globalists are the ones who organized all of this real estate around the car, which is also soon to be an obsolete technology. Yeah. But the community-oriented, tribal-oriented groups, if you look at refugees now, like out of
Is that why they call it a chief of police?
Yeah, they were the chiefs. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But refugees now are just scattered individually. They're small families. When you had the Trail of Tears, with the Indian tribes, the whole tribes were moved. Tribes have moved all over the globe. The Vikings, and the Normans had various places where they moved as whole tribes. But now the style of refugees
it's
we're
just
creating
the family of tears
are
of the loved ones
atomizing. Exactly. And so they have to find, a whole new place to fit in instead of coming with their family and fitting in as a whole pack.
Okay, so how do we incorporate that with the DUIs?
Yeah, because the DUIs are based upon a colonial mindset. Yeah. Because it's a globalist mindset. You have to have
go into the saloon, go have go commit a crime, and be arrested, and then is that where you're going with?
No. Because you need to have cars, you need to have it, the DUIs are how you interface with the current technology.
Well, I've also had a friend get a BUI when he had his little, what are you going to do? Pull me over on your bicycle, cling, cling, and then he got taken away on a bicycle. And then I had another friend that was arrested for a drunk in public in Catalina. And if you're ever arrested in Catalina, listen to the sheriffs, because they'll make sure you miss your little ferry, your boat to get back. So be more respectful than normal.
Let me maybe give this example again back from the Rorabaugh book about colonialism, right? They woke up drinking punch to get drunk. They were drunk all day long because they didn't interface with the machines that would kill them when they were drunk. Yeah. The industrial era, when you're working with machines that will kill you, you can't be drunk. We switched our drug from alcohol to caffeine.
Yeah, and one of my favorite songs is "I Don't Want to Work, I Want to Sit and Play on the Drums all day."
Exactly. And that's how most people live. Yeah. The Kalahari Sun people who are living in a desert environment work 15 hours a week. Yeah. Our needs to work are more distracting and psychological rather than substantive.
And then we were talking about earlier, to the not having manufacturing centers and having the agrarian lifestyle where whereas we're relying on our family more and they do more labor, but now we don't have that need, so we're smaller families, so we're getting to relate and love less. I know as a father of 3, I've had to be a lot more patient with myself, and my wife has been more patient with me, and I've had to go beyond myself to do that. So I wonder if I think you called it the industrial system, or
The weird, yeah,
the industrial, which
weird,
is
weird
the
acronym.
anagram or the acronym is
Western, educated, industrialized, and now I
yeah,
forget the last two.
yeah,
But it's we have it's because we've been living so isolated away from that pack,
uh-huh.
that everybody lived with until recently, that we've developed things that we consider normal. And if you look at them anthropologically, they've only been here a few decades, and they're quite weird.
Yeah, no, I was reading that that the some of our, or I mean, some people think they're our descendants or not, but some of the chimpanzees and the primates and the other stuff with anthropology, their average sleep time was 7 hours, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh well, industrialized, we're not getting to sleep as much. It's like, well, how are we able to even sleep less and evolve to that when? Right.
One of my favorite descriptions of the social zone that I'm talking about is your monkey sphere. Every breed of primates has a certain tribe size.
Yeah.
And the baboons can be, I think 70 or 80, and some are just one or two, but that's your monkey sphere, and the humans have a monkey sphere, of 50 close people and 150 as a tribe, right? So are we working within our monkey sphere, and what are your relationships to that? Having relationships with monkeys is actually a really good way to learn about humans, because so much of what we do is still with monkeys.
How do we get Jane Goodall on here? I'm sure she would be
Love
a
to get
hoot.
Jane.
That'd be
Yeah,
amazing.
Jane would be amazing.
Do you think Jane gets drunk? You think she's
I
probably
hope
gotten a
so.
DUI or so?
I think monkeys get
maybe
drunk.
doing it with the monkeys.
If the monkeys get drunk,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I hear you. So, what else can we talk about with the DUI that was pretty that can be enlightening for some of our listeners?
Yeah, it's when you've got somebody that has one of the loved ones of a DUI, I think it's really important that you have to get them back on track. They need support. That is somebody who is taking.
Or maybe more of some legal. I agree
Well,
with you.
that's true.
I agree with you that we do have to get back to the poor judgment chain and nurture them and figure out what's the core issue
Yeah.
and work through that and give the support and help people to take more accountability, not potentially hurt others or victimize, though people say, I didn't mean to, but it does come back to personal responsibility. But legally, do you have any legal
I
tips
do.
that you can?
I do. DUIs are very, very cut and dry in the courts. It's probably the most common conviction they have, and there's not a lot of facts to prove.
Yeah.
And so they will not give you a lot of attention, in my experience, on this. You need to comply. And if most of the system is just set up to escalate if you don't comply, and they have ranges of escalation, but it gets bad quick. So DUIs, you really need to make one. Zero is best, but if you have one, you got to make it stop, and you got to make those changes in your life, because it is a sign. It's like a symptom of a bigger problem in a body.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So if we're talking about one on, and that's a huge problem. I hope that the majority of our listeners are 0 to 1. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, of
from your
course they will be.
perspective, what legal tips can you say are 0 to 1? So those that haven't gotten it will find, oh, that's kind of cool to hear. I'm going to follow that versus the 1 to 3.
Maybe the thing is, you need to evaluate whether or not you need an attorney, because there are things that you can fight DUIs on, but but it really takes an attorney to know what that is, and otherwise they're so simple and cookie cutter as they go through,
Mhm.
that sometimes you might want to even represent yourself and just take the punishment, right? For a DUI, because there's not a lot of defenses that go through, or the ones that are there, attorneys will be able to pick up, and you won't know, because you're not going to be able to figure out from your own experience what goes on in that court all the time. There are different cultures that develop around different judges in different courts.
Yeah.
And something like DUI that happens so much, a local attorney will be able to tell you. But this may be something more like a ticket, that you deal with,
Mhm.
that you just bucket up, and because they'll give you a good deal for the first ones. Now, then if you're doing repeating and you're going through this, they're gonna send you to prison soon
Mhm.
if you keep that up.
In your opinion, and then I'll wrap this up soon, but in lieu of pro per or somebody that's going to be representing themselves, do you think that the public defenders, knowing that they deal with it so much and deal with the same judges, that they assuming that there's a fair amount of consistency of the charges in the case, let's say between 0.08 to the 0.13 or something like that, that they've worked out, hey, settle for this, we'll get you to that and move it along?
For sure, but if you're driving and you're drinking, you probably have an income and you may well not qualify for the public defender. Public defenders are basically for those who don't have money. And so if you've got a job that you need to get to and you need to go through, the DUI is the most common case that you wouldn't be qualified for a public defender.
Well, why don't you get into a little bit about what that amount is to see if somebody's listening, whether they would even qualify for a public defender or not?
Yeah, so each community has their own standards as they go through, but essentially you can think of if you're working at anything other than that low level work, if you're just supporting yourself, you're going to have to pay all or some of it. Sometimes they will give you the public defender and then give you a bill later on based on your ability to pay.
Is that based off your tax return or what?
Yeah, no, you end up, I mean, there's a whole financial qualification that the public defender will do if you ask. But if you're indigent, if you don't have an income, they'll give one to you. But just if you're going to look at the criminal justice system, those cases where you have to have private attorneys
Right.
is going to be much more common in a DUI than most any other case.
I guess it goes into the Miranda. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you.
Exactly.
That's not a subjective decision, so there's probably some objective metric.
Yes,
So,
it's just different in every court. So I don't want to, mislead someone by what that is. But it's basically, if you've got money to buy alcohol and
Right.
drive a car, you got to pay your attorney. Is the likelihood is.
so what are some key takeaways that we've taken from this episode? I think we've gone very circular. We've gotten to some points. We've talked about the Supreme Court, talked about some points with DUI. But I mean, what else do you think that's a very important thing for us to leave our listeners with?
I think again, and I've said this in some of the other episodes, we're really changing right now. There is a lot of change that we're going through, and the world has had many systems that have worked for millions of people over thousands of years, and there's a lot of wisdom there, to be able to be able to look at in those that we consider colonized, right? In those cultures that for some of the reasons that Gorsuch called us out on, we need to listen. We need to listen to them, and a lot of the adaptations we made for new technology, that technology is obsolete.
Wow. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And we were talking earlier about how even the colleges and the application process
Yeah.
and the limited time that people are putting in and just a lot of changes that are taking place across the world. So how do we make the more podcasts more fun, more enjoyable, more laughing? I think you and I get more serious and more
We do.
introspective. And then it's like, I mean, we can have a little evil or
We need some more evil laughs.
and we just listen to it.
Well,
Yeah.
the next one we're going to bring in a guest,
Yeah.
so we'll see how that that works in as well. And I have fun myself, so
Yeah.
I hope the audience enjoys it. They learn something, and we'll provide some more resources for them to look up. And I'm just glad to get to spend a little bit of time with you.
It's
Sean.
fun spending time with you too. I love hearing that that the Philippines and Guam are a territory and now they're a country. And
Well, not Guam, Philippines, and Cuba.
Philippines and Cuba.
Yeah, Guam's still a territory.
Yeah, I had a gal in boot camp that was from Guam, and so that makes sense that it's its own with us. But I'm just interested to learn more about that later. But thank you for listening in, audience. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Remember to follow, rate, and review. This podcast is made possible by Angels Bail Bonds, Turning Leaf, and SearchInmate.com. And if you have any bail questions, you can contact me at 844-BY-JAIL. That's BYE. And what are we going to talk about on the next episode? Why don't you talk a little bit about Joe Topo?
Yeah, Topo Padilla, one of the
Topo Padilla, sorry, yeah.
another lifelong bail agent. Has got a similar background to you, but more focused on the bounty hunting side.
It's so fun.
Yeah, nephew of the famous Leonard Padilla. There's a good National Geographic that they did with him, and Topo's now the president of the PBUS, so we'll have more of a national. That's a national bail organization, and is always in tune with the politics.
Yeah, I'm super excited. And we want to align a lot of what he has to say with the future Attorney General for California, Anne-Marie
Yes.
Schubert, and looking forward to Topo coming in and then Anne-Marie coming in and hopefully unifying bail and law and the criminal justice system and having it all be in one bag so that it's not as disjointed of an understanding of what bail is to the world.
Absolutely. Bail is very simple and it's very clear and it's been very confused. We're going to try and keep it simple.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. It's been a hoot.
Thank you.